So let me now turn to our honorable speakers now. I'm very pleased that Gabriele Bischoff is with us. She's a member of the European Parliament for the S&D Group and member of the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs. Very warm welcome, Gabriele. A warm welcome also goes to Professor Bettina Kohlrausch. She is director of the Institute of Economic and Social Research, WSI, at the Hans Böckler Foundation, and she's also a very well-known expert on the future of work. Welcome, Ms. Professor Kohlrausch. And last but certainly not least, welcome Dr. Tim Blanders, who is Associate Professor of Comparative Social Policy at the University of Oxford. And among other topics, he has done extensive research on the rise of radical right-wing populists. Welcome, Tim. Welcome to all our speakers. Before we dive into the debate, I give the floor for a second to Oliver Philipp and Michael Jennewein from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, who will quickly welcome you all as well. Over to you, Oliver and Philipp.
Yeah, thank you very much, Johannes. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's with a great pleasure that on behalf of the Competence Center Future of Work, I warmly welcome you to the third edition of FES Tech Talk, and also a special welcome and thank you from my side to our speakers for today. It's really great to have you here. So it was already said, my name is Oliver Philipp, and I'm a policy officer at the Competence Center Future of Work based in Brussels. And today I have the pleasure to jump in for Matthias Weber, the head of our Competence Center, who was supposed to welcome you today, but unfortunately he cannot be with us this afternoon. So before I had a quick look at the participant list, and I'm very happy to see a few names who join our tech talks since the beginning, but of course there are also some new names. So maybe for them, please allow me to quickly remind you the idea of our tech talks and why we chose this topic for today for our discussion. So with the FES Tech Talks, the Competence Center Future of Work aims to explain current, often complex topics related to digitalization and the future of work to a broader public interested in the topic, as well as to potential and actual stakeholders. So, and we try to do this, which might be one of the biggest challenges, in a very short amount of time. So in order not to lose too much time for the discussion, let me just quickly share our idea behind today's topic. So as you might know, the ongoing digital transformation is changing the world of work. Digitalization can lead, for example, to automatization of jobs, and the requested qualifications for workers are changing. Home office and flexible working hours are becoming the new normal. And all this has, of course, a huge impact for workers and the future of work. So our aim was to link the debate of the future of work with the political consequences of the digital transformation. And therefore, I'm very happy that we could gain the FES Competence Center on the Democracy of the Future in Vienna to organize with us this tech talk today. So now, before I hand over to my colleague Michael, I would like to thank you all for your participation already and your interest in this event, and I wish us a great discussion. Thank you very much, and Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Oliver. I'm also warm welcome from my side. My name is Michael Jennewein. I'm a researcher at the FS Democracy of the Office Vienna, who co-hosts this tech talk today. And we work on democracy-related issues in the OSCE region, such as polarization, inequality, youth, citizen assemblies, and right-wing populism, always with this general aim in the backs of our heads, how to improve the quality of our democracies and make them ready for the future. I'm also happy that we finally are able to set up such an event, linking two important topics together, which are dear to the FES family. As already pointed out, how digitalization is already shaping and changing our societies, and in consequence also challenge our democracies. It was just clear to us that we here is a discussion that might be worthwhile having, as the both themes, future of work and state of democracy, are often discussed in isolation. So we thought it might be interesting to have a conversation whether digitalization actually only further maybe increases the polarization between those who benefit from this transformation and those who are not, and those who do not, giving often fertile ground for destructive forces such as right-wing populists to gain influence. So I'm confident we will be learning today a lot about this interlinkage from our speakers, and I also encourage our guests and participants to ask questions. With this, I won't talk any longer and hand over back to Johannes, our moderator for today, and wish you all an interesting debate.
Thank you very much, Michael and Oliver. So without further ado, let's jump right into the debate. It has been already said, we want to discuss the interlinkage between the future of work, specifically digitalization, and the future of democracy. And first of all, and I think there's no doubt that digitalization and also automatization leads to disruptive changes in industries, but also on the labor market, changing qualifications, redistributing labor income, and more generally shifting not only our working culture, for instance, by promoting home office and flexible working hours, but also changing the requirements for workers on how to succeed on the labor market. You might have noticed that number already. McKinsey estimates that in about 60% of current occupations, 1/3 of the constituent activities could be automated in the future. So that's a vast transformative change. And this change can and do create winners and losers. For instance, along the lines of education, income, geography, or mobility. And if an industrial transformation creates losers, this can become a challenge for democracy, especially when vulnerable groups feel disadvantaged or even forgotten by decision makers, and then as a consequence, lose trust in the democratic system as a whole. So my first question goes to Professor Bettina Kohlrausch, and I'd like to know from her how you see this connection between digitalization of work and democracy, and in what ways does that create winners and losers? Ms. Kohlrausch, bitte.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, I think generally there is certainly an interlinkage between both things, work and democracy, or digitalization of work and democracy. And this is because there is an interlinkage between work in general and democracy. I think particularly in the European Union, it's a basic idea of the European social model that works kind of, I'm sorry, I'm a sociologist, so that work forms a particular, how we call it, a mode of social integration. So work offers participation and modes of participation, basically by guaranteeing social securities and certain social standards, but also by guaranteeing democratic participation in the realm of collective bargaining and particularly, of course, co-determination. And I think being socially integrated is very important to understand oneself as a part of a society. And that, again, is a very important condition for democratic engagement and for supporting the idea of democracy in general. And this is also something we do see in our research. We do see that socially better integrated people, and that does not only mean that they earn more money, it also means that they feel, for example, recognized for that what they are doing and what they can for their qualifications, for example. And we see that these people who are better integrated are less prone, for example, to anti-democratic attitudes or right-wing populism. So we have the strong interlinkage, particularly in the European social model, between work and democracy. And when then we think about that, digitalization, of course, is a major driver of the changes of work. It's just very simple to assume, and I think that's something we also see in our research, that the digitalization of work is interlinked with the question of the future of democracy. And this, of course, has something to do that the mode of social integration connected with work may change. For example, what you already said, that we might have processes of upskilling due to automatization, which may lead to the devaluation of qualification. And that is very connected with the question of recognition. People may feel less recognized when what they did learn and what they used to do has not any value of a society anymore. Or, of course, if people lose their jobs, or if a lot of, or if new jobs are created in the realm of platform work, for example, with lower standards, social standards, and lower wages, for example. So the question whether the digitalization of work does create winners and losers, and I think it's quite likely that that will happen, that people will also lose their jobs, or at least lose their securities, their employment securities. That is highly interlinked with the question and the future of democracy. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Kohlrausch. That's very interesting. I will now turn to Tim Vlanders, who has co-published in April a report called Understanding Right-Wing Populism. So Tim, maybe you can help us a bit in understanding if actually economic grievances, uncertainties, which may result from digitalization, as we have just heard, if those economic factors in general can explain the success of right-wing populists, or if there are also other factors. And if you think that there is a mobilization potential for right-wing populists related to this area of digitalization of work.
Yes, thank you, Johannes. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So in the report, what we show is that in the last 20 to 30 years, both economic and cultural concerns have driven support for a radical right populist parties. And that's because they create different forms of insecurities, which are then exploited by far-right parties to try and increase their electoral support. So in terms of automation, digitalization, and increasingly artificial intelligence, what we see is that there's a profound transformation already happening, as was just mentioned, in terms of the world of work. And this creates substantial uncertainty for workers' fortunes in the labor market. So what's the scale of the problem here? I won't say too much about that because we just discussed it, but what's very clear since the 1990s, especially in routine, so-called routine jobs, those that use skills replaceable by technology, you get a decline 30–40% of employment there. Those are especially people with perhaps lower education and replaceable skills, and it affects their unemployment potential, and it affects their earning potential, and creates insecurity. But that's the objective leg of what's going on. You also have a subjective leg that matters politically, which is that most people, if you look at survey, really believe that automation is having an important effect on them, and that it's going to have an even greater effect in the future. And this creates both higher subjective and objective economic insecurity. It also creates inequality. And it adds up to a number of different pressures that were already there: globalization, deindustrialization, and the movement of workers across frontiers, right? And these three pressures are being compounded by automation. What does this mean for far-right party support? You have an objective effect and a subjective effect. There's a number of studies across European countries and also in the US case that show that economic hardship induced by automation tilts individuals' attitudes in a way that then pushes them to vote for radical right parties. This has been shown in as many as 13 European countries between 1999 and 2015. There's also some good evidence on the US election in 2016, where Trump did well. But you also have a subjective leg, which is that it's not so much, and Bettina mentioned something about that, it's not so much that it's only your economic insecurity rising, leading you to support these parties, but even the threat, the risk of automation makes you question your status, makes you question your position in society. It makes you feel status, so-called status anxiety. And there's some good evidence there as well, that when you feel, when you have fears about a relative societal decline, or you have concerns about your position in social hierarchy, that also feeds radical right parties. So two mechanisms, one more economic, one more status-based, and they reinforce each other and lead people who are exposed to automation to vote for these parties.
Thank you very much, Tim, also for this perspective on your recent research. And I think Michael just posted the link to the report in the chat, so please have a look there. Now from the academic evidence to the political consequences, Gabriele Bischoff, I'm glad that you are with us. You are designing and also voting on policy measures that facilitate the future of work and that tackle possible new social inequalities. At least they are meant to tackle them. What do you think? What should be the right political approach to this on the European level, taking also into account that there are still some constraints for a common European social policy?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. And indeed, from a political perspective, on one hand, it is quite interesting to mention also, before I go into the European social policy and what we can do on political level, that if you look at the right-wing parties, that a certain form of success or of economic fear or status fear they are spreading would not be possible without digitalization, because the role and the way they use social media, for example, to spread this is also quite an interesting phenomenon. But this is something I would just use as an introduction. And indeed, I think what we can see is in the European institutions, but especially in the European Parliament, where I'm a member, we address a lot of these questions. And one key issue, at least for the political group I'm coming from, is the question, how can we manage in all this change, in all these also transitions we are discussing, to strengthen democracy at work? Because we can also see, and research, we discussed a lot of research here also in the Parliament, is that it stabilizes democracy, that we can see also where we have developed systems of democracy at work here, and involvement of workers and their representatives in these change, that this strengthens the resilience of democratic systems. But what we can also see at the same time here is that we are approaching, for example, these transitions from different angles, but the to have an overview on really how big these processes are not, or what we have to address, how many workers will be affected, are not so obvious. We know that, especially when we discuss the Green Deal, that we said we will only manage really to achieve it if we have a strong support also of workers, and the best way would be to guarantee this, but also to strengthen the safety and well-being at work. It was mentioned here by Bettina, but also by others. This is why at the moment we will have next week in the plenary, I think, one of the biggest social policy packages, and that is the minimum wage directive, where we not only set standards for adequate minimum wages in Europe. This will affect more than 20 million people, but also where we address the question, how do we make sure that people are better protected by better collective bargaining coverage, but also the access, for example, of trade unions here. And I think that is very important. Maybe the debate also later, we try to address, for example, with the platform work, and that's a negotiation that is ongoing at the moment, also to protect better the growing number of people that work on platforms in regards to social protection, for example. So I think it is very important that we have a coherent approach here, and this is also why I did an initiative report in the Parliament, and that got a lot of support of almost all political groups except the far right, that we need a more coherent approach in Europe to strengthen democracy at work, especially in regards to these huge transitions. And that does not only affect digitalization and all of that, but really also the implementation of the Green Deal. And let me finish by saying, I think the biggest test of European social polity and also of solidarity will be coming this autumn and winter regarding the challenges we have with the war in Ukraine and the explosion of energy prices, etc. So I think yes, we are addressing this question in the European Parliament, but it's still not a consistent approach here, but a lot of different for example, legislation in different areas. But I think if I take up the last comment on this question of insecurity, be it economic or status insecurity, I mean, the message of the Commission President is that we will leave no one behind, but this requires coherent political answers to this. To be addressed.
Thank you very much, Gabriele. That was already a variety of political areas where you addressing the issue at hand, and also mentioning the role, the possible role of unions here. We will come back to that later on. I would like to quickly remind our audience, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A tool. We are having an eye on that, and I will pick a first question very soon. I think there's already one. But first, I'd like to ask Bettina Kohlrausch again on the political measures. Gabriele Bischoff just said that there is not yet really a consistent approach on the European level. From your perspective, how could a consistent approach look like, either from the European level, or also please feel free to look at the national level, where most social policies are still implemented in the European Union?
Yeah, maybe I can go one step back, because I think what we all talked about, these economic uncertainties or subjective uncertainties and status fears and status uncertainties. I think it's important to understand that they're on the one hand interlinked, but what we saw in our research is that particularly the status uncertainties are also fueled by the feeling not being able to determine one's own very future, and by not being able to influence and control what is really happening with oneself. And I think if we talk in general about a new social approach, it's really important to understand that social and democratic rights do belong together. And I think what is really important is on the one hand, really to make sure that no one is left behind, to secure social standards. And I also agree totally with Gabriele that the minimum wage directive is really a big step forward for this, because that really means that a lot of people in the European Union will have higher wages and a higher level of social security. And also, for example, it will decrease the gender pay gap. It has a lot of positive outcomes. So I think that's actually quite a good example for a measure which already or is about to be taken, and which will really help. But I think what is important in general to understand, we do need this social measures or economic measures. We need economic security, but we also need democratic participation. We have to ensure that the digitalization, but also the socio-economic, socio-ecological transformation, which is which will come in the future, that this is implemented by asking the people, or by including really the people. And I think work is actually a really good place to do so, because we already have a lot of instruments where we can guarantee democracy at work, for example, by the means of co-determination. So I think it's really important to understand that democratic and social rights really belong together, and that this really makes people feeling integrated and part of a society.
Thank you very much. I'd like to give this question actually back to Gabriele, because Bettina Kohlrausch, I think, made a strong statement here for this interlink of social security and democratic participation. Gabriele, can you give us a little bit of an insight into the debate within the European Parliament? Do you see that there is a majority already making this linkage between these two things, or is there something that is maybe part of our discussion here, but not really part of the debate of the majorities in the Parliament?
I mentioned the initiative report I did in the European Parliament and discussed with the shadow rapporteurs from the other groups. And what we can see is, I think there is a general support that if we want to address these huge transitions that we have to cope with, we have to deal with, that we will only be able to do so if we have a stronger participation of one hand workers and their representatives in this process. And this will also increase the trust that we will be able to successfully manage these transitions. In general, I said there is a big support of the pro-European big political groups, but when you come to discuss the instruments concretely, how to do so, then it gets a bit more complicated, because we, at the moment, for example, we are working on a new report. How can we strengthen the role of European Works Councils very concretely in this process, especially addressing these transitions, and on concrete rights to improve existing rights of European Works Councils so that they can better help to manage these transitions. For example, earlier information and a lot of other points. And then to get majorities is a bit more complicated than in general. But I think there is an awareness and this changed in the last years in the European institutions, also in many member states that are affected, that this might be a good way how to deal with it. If I go on the political level, because I don't work only in the EMPL committee, but also a lot in the Committee on Constitutional Affairs, what we did for the first time in the European Union was also there a huge experiment with the Conference on the Future of Europe, how to involve citizens much at an early stage, new forms how to do it, because we realized that it would enlarge our debate, and despite the work of Parliament, that more citizens' involvement would be also a very good way in European policies. And not everything worked well, but we evaluate very much these ways of early involvement to come up with permanent tools, instruments, etc. to do so. And also here, digitalization helped, because to have a European public sphere, for example, we experimented with a digital platform where people could engage, for example. So on different levels, yes, in the world of work with the transitions, there is an awareness, but it's nevertheless, if you discuss the concrete tools, to find majorities for improvement of concrete rights will still be a long battle. But I think there's a general awareness that participation also is essential, not only in the world of work, but also in the world of politics.
Thank you very much. Let's stay for one more moment on the policy side. Tim, based on the empirical evidence that you are dealing with in your job, what do you think? Can social policies actually help against populists, and especially against the exploitation of populists, of grievances? And maybe you can also give us some concrete examples from some European countries where you think that there were successful social policies.
Yes, thank you. And so some of what I would say will echo my co-panelists. I mean, I suppose the first thing to think about when facing such a question is, what is it exactly that leads people who are subjected to automation to turn to far-right parties? And here, what we find is that the effects of automation are quite complex. And as a result, that allows some parties to exploit confusion as to the causes of insecurity that people are facing. So for instance, there's some evidence that the same type of workers that are more exposed to automation are also more exposed to international competition. People might, in some cases, misattribute the causes of their insecurities. So they might think that immigration or globalization is what's causing their insecurity, when it's really automation. But regardless of the complex dynamics, what we find is that people who are subjected to automation are experiencing social and psychological consequences that might lead them to become more authoritarian or nativists in their view. And that allows far-right parties to propose economic nationalist responses to these kinds of structural changes, or to present a traditional way of life as a way to turn back the clock on whatever insecurities people are facing. And these people often have strong discontent that leads them to become anti-establishment, and that's also captured by far-right parties. So what can we do in terms of policies? Well, policies for sure have an immense role to play in terms of addressing the economic insecurities, risks, and anxieties that people experience because of volatility that they experience in the marketplace. So as a worker, I might be undergoing certain threats to my job, certain changes in my work conditions, and these changes can be very destabilizing and threatening. So we have some really good evidence that people who face economic risks and grievances, when they are protected by policies in some ways, they become less insecure, and that in turn makes them less likely to vote for far-right parties. And this is something we show in our recent report with my colleague Daphne Haliciopoulou. What can we do with automation specifically for small ideas? One idea is pedagogical. We need to make sure that the sources of insecurity that are coming from certain places are actually identified as coming from these places. So what we don't want is people blaming immigration for issues to do with restructuring of technological organization of work. Pedagogical. Second one, preemptive. A lot of the degree to which automation gets translated into the workplace can be shaped by policies, and this is where participation, economic democracy at work matters a lot, because it makes a big difference whether you are automated in a way that threatens you or whether machines help you get better work conditions. That was the second policy. Reactive policies, we can retrain and create new jobs to provide to people who are negatively affected. And last but not least, compensatory policies. Some people who are losing from automation cannot be reactivated in any way. We need to compensate them. We need to provide policies to protect them. And this is where, just to tie into the example of minimum wages, we have evidence that low-income workers are less likely to vote for far-right parties when minimum wage are higher and the insecurities is lower, right? And we find that with family policy, unemployment benefits, job protection of work, and so on and so forth.
Thank you very much. These were quite interesting and also concrete examples. I will take some first questions from the audience. And the first one I would like to give to Bettina Kohlrausch, because it is a more general question, I would say. So the question is, do you think digitalization limits the way of standing against injustice or limit the room for discussion? If yes, what is the way to overcome this challenge? So is digitalization actually a tool to advance justice, or is it actually an obstacle to overcome injustice? I think that's the question here.
Well, I think digitalization is a social process. I mean, we are doing it, and I found very important what Tim said. The question is, how do we implement digital tools? Do we augment? Do we need to, for example, in hospitals, we use it for to make jobs less harder, and then maybe that people, doctors or nurses, have more time for their patients, so that they actually have a higher quality of work, but also the quality of the service is increased? Or do we implement it to divide the labor market in really low-skilled job and few high-skilled jobs? So, and I think that's something what we can decide. We can decide how we want to implement these things. So I think there is actually the potential to have more justice, because if we are able, by due to automatization, to produce more things in less time, we have more time for other things, for example, for care work, for our children, for our friends, for political engagement. And if we manage as a society a fair redistribution also of this new free time, then a society can become more democratic, fairer, and better, also when it comes to the redistribution of paid and unpaid work between men and women. But if we do not manage this, then it could also increase justice, decrease social justice, and increase social inequality. So, and at the end of the day, it's on us, I would say.
It's on us, that's for sure. There's a second question which I would like to give to Gabriele Bischoff. The question is as follows. Platform economy was mentioned by you, Gabriele. Some claim that an intrinsic feature of gig work or crowd work is to diminish the influence of workers on corporate level. Where do you see the main hurdles in order to achieve a harmonization of labor law of EU member states in regard to integrate platform economy into traditional labor law or social security measures?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And this was what we discussed in the European Parliament already some time ago. And we came up with a proposal, an initiative report in direction to the Commission to ask them to come up with regulation here, or with a proposal on platform work. And our idea was that we see, first of all, every worker also on platform as a worker, and that we would reverse the burden of proof who is a worker to the companies, and to come up here with a solution that platform work is also a form of work and that is protected, and especially regarding social protection, but also labor rights. And I would like to highlight that this was quite a huge debate, because I don't know if you had heard about the Uber files that journalists digged up, how much influence certain companies try to, how much lobbying big corporate companies did here in the European Parliament, but also on national level, really to make sure that their business model would also continue in the future, and by inventing a third category of workers, which would have been a big risk for the future. But the European Parliament in the end, and with the French rapporteur, came up with this proposal to the Commission, and by now we have a legal proposal from the Commission that took up this idea of the Parliament, and we are negotiating at the moment this. We especially, I think that the proposal is not good enough yet, also has new risks, but this is, we have now a piece of legislation where we can make sure that also we have not only some more social protection, but also don't have a new form of employment that undermines especially a lot of the rights in the European Union. So I'm quite optimistic. We can also see in platform work we have different forms of work. We can already see that also companies are reacting by offering more and more workers on platforms if they want to have a normal work contract as an employee or other forms. So I think, and I hope it will be possible. It also refers to right of organizing of people working on platforms, a right of trade unions here, that we can improve the situation that we have. And we can see in some member states, like in Spain or other, that we already also have national legislation addressing this, but it would be very important to have a broad European standard here. And this is why I hope that during this year and the next months that we come to an agreement regarding the platform work and how to regulate it. Because I think it will be also, next to the minimum wage, an important signal that Europe is not only capable but also really protecting citizens, and that it can do it better than it would be possible on member state level. Because the platforms are also not limited to member state level, but internationally operating.
Yes, thank you very much, Gabriele. There's another question which is not directly linked to digitalization, but I think it fits very well to what Bettina Kohlrausch just said previously with regards to the question if or the kind of our own agency as society, if we will use digitalization for the better and to overcome injustice, or if it will advance injustice. And the question is related to working hours. So Bettina Kohlrausch, this is a question. It comes from Kerstin Toba, I heard that we are looking at 42 hours working hours per week. Is the idea, sorry, of freeing up humans to have more time to spend on their social needs and obligations, maybe a smoking screen drawing on hope rather than a realistic path? What would it take to seriously implement a 30-hour week and stay an important global player? I think this is related to the European economy as a whole.
Yeah, well, I think I'm a big fan of a 30-hour working week, and also of a 4 days working week. Not the way it's done in Belgium, not to work 40 hours in 4 days, but to work less in 4 days, for example, 30 hours. I think it's time policy, as I call it, is really like a main leverage also for justice between gender, and is really important. And I think, I mean, I understand there's the question how to stay an important global player. The question is whether this would weaken the economic power of a firm. And I don't actually think so, because we knew from research that firms who do so become more productive. And I think in Germany, we do have a problem, not so much with unemployment, but we do not have enough skilled worker. And to become, for example, more attractive to employees, a shorter working time is a very good tool. So I think there is it's no contradiction between lower levels of working hours and being productive and being a global player. And I think we do actually have quite a good examples throughout Europe. For example, I think in Denmark, in the care sector. So, and we should look at that. And I think it's really, I think it's really an important next step to talk about working hours. And and I think also from the perspective of democracy, to increase working hours is not a good idea, not the right way.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask one other question to Tim. We have now discussed actually quite different aspects of the future of work, working hours, digitalization, the new type of jobs called gig workers. Can you give us an idea of how populists are trying to exploit these issues around the future of work already in their political campaigns? Is this visible in their campaigns? I mean, we had a campaign just recently in France. We will have elections coming up this month in Italy. What do you sense there? Is this an issue in campaigns of populists?
Yeah, it's a great question, and to some extent the jury is still up as to how effective and how prevalent these techniques are on the part of these parties. I think what's really clear is that you used to have a so-called winning formula of far-right parties back in the 1990s. It was essentially on a market liberal, more extremist platforms. And then from the 2000 onwards, what you see is that they put a new cloak on. They move away from the more extremist, obvious, racist, in some cases, Nazi ties, and they move towards a more quote unquote palatable, more civic form of nationalism that comes across perhaps as less overtly racist. And in that process, they start becoming more welfare chauvinists, at least rhetorically, moving away from a market liberalism into a space where they say we need to address economic grievances. What kind of economic grievances do they tend to emphasize? Those associated with globalization of goods, services, capital, and people, and framed in a way where the in-group in societies are being threatened by out-groups. Is always, in a way, different shades of foreign threats that are being generated. So this is a typical soil rhetoric, the new kind of winning formula for them is to emphasize these kinds of threats. Now, as I said before, automation comes up, it creates insecurities, but to some extent, some workers do not know where the insecurities are coming from. So the trick for these parties is to try and merge them as part of the same thing. It could be that it's foreign companies doing this. It could be that it's foreign bosses doing this, and so on and so forth. So my reading is that they're exploiting it to the extent that they can fit it in this economic nationalist narrative, to the extent that they can fit it in this welfare chauvinism. That's one leg. I think the other leg increasingly is also this anti-establishment. So if they can tie it in to a presumed move of certain left-wing actors to a center that has abandoned workers, and they can use as an example automation, then they will do so. But I don't think that's where most of the mobilization potential that they have lies. They're staying to some extent on the traditional themes from the 2000s. But in the future, they will adapt, especially if mainstream parties don't provide a response that will create a space, and they will exploit the space and put in the classic, anti-immigration, welfare chauvinist messages.
Thank you very much, Tim. And this is the perfect final question, I think, to or for Bettina and Gabriele. You just mentioned it's all about actually a better answer, a better response by mainstream parties, by the democratic parties. So maybe Gabriele, first to you, what would you say, what should be the sort of narrative of the democratic mainstream parties regarding the future of work in the context of digitalization to avoid this status anxiety, which can be exploited by populists, as we just heard, the economic uncertainties? What could be a sort of a narrative of hope maybe in this area?
Okay. Yes, indeed. I think the first thing is you need to have a narrative of hope, but you also need the policies so that people will have a certain level of trust that something will really change. And I think here, this is also an opportunity here, and to make sure to underline that digitalization is one driving force, but it's not the only one, and that it is the responsibility of politicians, of political parties, to find answers here. This is why it is for me so important that we have on European answers and policies to coherent policies to say, okay, we have these huge transitions, digitalization, we have the Green Deal, we have globalization, but we are able to address it. And if there, for example, you will lose your job, new jobs will be coming up, and we will make sure also that we have training and support to make this transition also on a personal level. And on the other hand, to strengthen participation, because I think what we see in research is that people participate in elections if they have the feeling that it makes a difference to their lives. And this is what we have to make very clear. And I think also we started with democracy at work. And I think this is also an important measure. You will be not just a victim, or you will be not just prone to these changes, but we want you to get involved also to shape these transitions and to do the changes. And you will have representatives, be it job stewards, that you elect, that will also do so, and that will give you a voice in this process. And this is something that will not happen automatically, but we need policies to do so. So to sum up, I would take up the slogan of the first modern democracy to say no taxation without representation, and here to say this representation also needs to be guaranteed in the world of work. And this is something that we can create and we will do also on European level.
Thank you very much, Bettina Kohlrausch. We have only 2 minutes left, so maybe just to shift the focus one more time, what could be the role of unions, trade unions, actually in this process of developing a better narrative than the right-wing populists?
I think, again, like really important here is the question of democracy at work. And we also saw in our research people who have more democratic rights in the workplace are more optimistic to master the challenges of digitalization, for example. And I think the crucial point here is co-determination. And it's important, I think, to realize that digitalization is not only about automatization, which we have since the industrialization, but also about implementing new business models, basically mainly platform-based work. And this is really not regulated work. And the problem is, if we have platform-based work, we don't really have a shop floor. But co-determination, qualification on things unions do happens on the shop floor. So unions really have to rethink how to organize. And I think they're doing this. And if we look at the US with Amazon, we have a big fight here in Germany with called Gorillas. And this is something what unions have to think about. How do we organize workers and how do we organize ourselves when the shop floor may become less important? It's a quite likely outcome of digitalization. One very concrete example is that, for example, one union agreed in the collective bargaining with the employers that they have digital access rights, that they can use the official email addresses also to access the workers, which was not clear before due to data protection, that they can use the channels, the digital channels already existing in the firm also for their work. Very concrete example, but really important for the future, I think.
Thank you very much. We are already 1 minute over the time. So let me quickly thank everyone for this highly insightful debate. A big thank you to our speakers, of course. Thanks also to our audience. I think it has become pretty clear and explained also very well by our speakers that there is a strong interlink between future of work and future of democracy. We have heard that democracy at work is key, and that social rights and democratic rights need to go hand in hand. And we have also heard on the other side, especially from Tim, that right-wing populist party may want to exploit this issue of digitalization at the workplace for future campaigns, but if they will actually do it remains to be seen. So I want to thank everyone once again, and I also want to use this final opportunity to tell you that you can stay updated and informed about these talks when you go on Twitter and follow the Twitter account of the FES Future of Work. That's FES FOW, and also FES Democracy you will find on Twitter to stay updated and stay informed. So I wish you a great afternoon and evening, and I hope to see you again very soon. Thanks everyone, and goodbye.